So what I was just doing there is I was playing chords how you normally would, except I was essentially adding spice to each chord or adding a little bit of pizzazz to each chord as I went along. I will say I did not know a single scale on ukulele for the longest time, well over years after I've been playing it. Yeah. But I found that I never really needed to because I developed this technique that I'm going to show you in this video where you can sort of do a little melodic riff depending on the chord that you're playing. Now, of course, it definitely helps to know some scales based on which key you're in, but it's not required to play. So let's say you're in the key of G and you have G, C, A minor, and D, and you need to figure out a way how you're going to keep that rhythmic section going, but also how you're going to add in a little bit of spice or pizzazz, something to make it a little bit more interesting than just chords. If you know any chords at all, then you can start adding what I like to call pizzazz to your chords. And I'm not just talking about arpeggiating your chords or doing some fancy finger work, although having that agility with your fingers will definitely help. But there's a lot of things you can do up here on the fretboard where you can expand your chord and implement different qualities of that chord, all while maintaining that sense of rhythm and what that chord is. Let me explain. So I like to think of this where each individual chord has its own little jig that you can do with it. And hopefully you'll start to build up a vocabulary of what you can do with each and every chord. Let's take G for example. We know G, it looks like this, sounds like this. And if we're trying to solo, we need to know which notes are going to sound good with G. Well, luckily, we know 3 notes right off the bat, and that is G, B, and D, which makes up the major triad for G major. But let me show you this. If I lift off of the E string, we're going to get a G6. Now, this is still a G chord, it's just a different quality of that chord. So go ahead and try switching from a G major to a G6 and see how you can fit that in rhythmically. Okay, so now I'm going to throw another chord at you, G7, which is basically a G chord except it's, I would say, inverted. And believe me, I use this all the time, going from a G6 to a G7 to a G major. That's going to give you a really cool build-up and provide a lot of tension, and then go on to another chord. So you'll start from the G6, and then I like to take my pointer finger and my pinky finger, and I like to sort of pivot back and forth on the E string, going from a G6 to G7 and G. So just try and switch back and forth from a G7 to a G major. And then try to put it all together, sounding something like this. So it's really quite a build-up, and I use it all the time, and it's a really great little thing to know. But I also want to draw your attention to the A string, which is our highest note on ukulele, and I want you to look at the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th fret of the A string. When you're playing a G chord, I want you to try and go up onto the A string while trying to maintain a little bit of that shape as much as you can. Try go up to the A string and use those frets, the 5th, 3rd, and 2nd fret, and see what you can do melodically with that. And you might think that it's going to be really difficult to get your fingers all the way up there. Well, the truth is, you don't have to keep that chord shape. Remember, we're trying to expand this chord, and once you start thinking about it like that, you're going to have way more options. So what I mean by that is specifically you can lift off of the E string, making it a G6, and go up onto the A string onto the 3rd fret And you'll still have the majority of that G sound while also giving it some pizzazz. And if you want, you can also just play an open A string, and that'll give you a lovely sound. I want to say that the A string is very important because it's the highest string we have, and that's going to stand out the most in solos. So all I'm doing here is taking that G chord and just decorating it with some extra notes. And if you play those notes rhythmically to the song you're playing, you can really start to sound like a solo all in itself. Now, these notes are not going to always work. You have to take into account the key you're playing in, the mood, the instruments, the rhythm. There's a lot of factors in determining how you're going to decorate your chords. But with a little bit of experimentation, you can start to develop what's going to work for you and what's not. And you can get away with notes that are not part of the key you're playing. And you can do this with passing notes and neighboring notes, which are essentially just notes in between chords that aren't necessarily a part of the key that you're playing. As long as you end on a note that is a part of the key before the chord changes, then you should be all set. And remember, if you're not sure which note is a part of that key, well, remember that you can just go back to, say you're playing in G, then you can just pick any note as long as you're in that G-shaped position. Let's take a look at the C chord. Now, because this chord requires only one finger, that gives us a lot more room to expand this chord. Now, believe it or not, you already know how to expand this chord. On the A string, we have the open, second, third, and fifth fret, just like the G chord. But what's great about the C chord is we have a lot more mobility and a lot more options when it comes to decorating the C chord. So you can do something a little bit like this. So there's a lot that we can do here, and in fact, it doesn't really matter where we go on the A string because we have our other strings, C, E, and G, which makes a C major chord. And all I'm doing here with the A string is adding another C, so we can move that around all while playing those other strings and you'll still get a C major sound. Okay, let's take a look at A minor. So again, you're only using one finger for this chord. So use those open strings to your advantage. One thing I find myself doing with the A minor is I love to quickly lift off of the G string and then hammer back on, and that'll give you a really fun little engagement there. So that's really fun once you get the hang of it, and I use it quite a lot. There's a lot of rhythms and cool things you can do with that. Let me just add something a little bit more. Check out the 4th and 5th fret of the G string. You can expand your chord up here, and that will give you even more options. For now, practice that a few times and see what you can do with that. And finally, I want to show you D major. Now, what I like to do with D is I'll just bar the bottom 3 strings. Normally, I wouldn't do that except if it were for the fact that I play upside down, which means I play left-handed on a right-handed ukulele. So my finger positioning is going to be a little bit different from yours if you play how you normally would. So what I'll do, and you can do this too with your preferred fingering, is I like to start actually a little bit flat, D flat, and slide up to the D chord. Once you get the hang of doing that, you can start to do it a little bit faster and more often rhythmically. So that one's always a really fun one. But let me add in once again the open, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th fret of the A string, and you can do something a little bit like this. All right, let's put that all together now. G, C, A minor, D. Now let me remind you that this is just a taste of what you can do. You can keep expanding these chords, you can just keep going and going and find out what's going to work for you. I'm just showing you the little bit of potential here. Once you learn scales, or if you already know some scales, you can really start expanding those chords even further. And soon you'll develop your own style of playing in no time. For example, you know that this is a C chord, but did you also know that there's a C chord here, here, and even all the way up here? Well, the point is, there's a lot of ways to expand. And I do want to say that this is not a video trying to tell you not to learn scales. In fact, knowing your scales is going to be extremely helpful when trying to figure out how you're going to decorate your chords. That's all I got. Remember to like and subscribe if you got valuable information out of this video, or if you enjoyed it. Okay, bye. Now I know you've been eyeing this resonator ukulele the whole video, so why don't you check out what that is all about right here? Yeah, it looks pretty interesting. Yeah, who knows what I'm gonna talk about? I don't know. Just click it right there.